The autumn morning at Windsor Castle carried a crisp chill that made the breath visible in small clouds as the royal guards prepared for one of the most important ceremonies of the year. Day marked the annual commemoration of fallen soldiers, an event that brought together military dignitaries, royal family members, and honored guests from around the Commonwealth. For the guards, this ceremony represented the highest honor of their service. It's a chance to pay respect to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Among the guards preparing for the ceremony was Private Marcus Williams. From Birmingham, who had served in the elite household division for 2 years, Marcus had earned his position through exceptional performance during his basic training and had quickly established himself as one of the most dedicated and reliable guards in his unit. His fellow soldiers respected him not only for his military skills but for his unwavering commitment to the traditions and values of the Royal Guard. Marcus came from a family with a long tradition of military service. His grandfather had served. In World War II, his father had been a career Army officer, and his older brother was currently deployed with the Special Air Service. For Marcus, wearing the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat was not just a job, but a continuation of his family's proud legacy of service to the crown. However, Marcus carried a burden that none of his fellow guards fully understood. As one of only 3 black soldiers in his unit, he had faced subtle but persistent challenges throughout his military career. While most of his colleagues treated him with respect and professionalism, there were occasional incidents that reminded him that not everyone in the military had fully embraced the diversity that modern Britain represented. The morning preparations were proceeding normally when Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Pemberton arrived to inspect the guards before the ceremony. Pemberton was a career officer from an old military family who had strong opinions about tradition and what he considered the proper image of the Royal Guard. At 55 years old, he represented a generation of military leaders who were struggling to adapt to the changing face of the British Armed Forces. As Pemberton walked down the line of guards conducting his inspection, he stopped abruptly when he reached Marcus. The other guards could sense tension immediately as the lieutenant colonel's expression darkened and his jaw tightened. What happened next would shock everyone present and test the bonds of brotherhood that had been forged among these elite soldiers. "Private Williams," Pemberton said in a voice loud enough for all the guards to hear, "I'm afraid there's been a change in today's assignments. You'll be reassigned to security duty inside the castle. We need someone with your particular background to handle that responsibility." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every guard in the formation understood exactly what Pemberton was implying, even though he had carefully chosen language that gave him plausible deniability. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized he was being removed from the most important ceremony of the year for reasons that had nothing to do with his performance or qualifications. Marcus had maintained perfect discipline records, scored highest in his unit on physical fitness tests, and had never received so much as a minor reprimand for any aspect of his service. The reassignment was clearly based on Pemberton's personal prejudices rather than any legitimate military consideration. "Sir, may I ask what specific security concerns require this reassignment?" Marcus asked, maintaining the respectful tone required when addressing a superior officer. Despite the humiliation burning in his chest, Pemberton's eyes narrowed as he responded with barely concealed irritation. "Private Williams, you are not in a position to question orders. Report to Captain Morrison for your new assignment immediately. The ceremony requires a certain traditional presentation that I'm sure you can understand." The other guards in the formation were stunned by what they were witnessing. They had served alongside Marcus for months and knew him to be an exemplary soldier who deserved his place in the ceremony as much as any of them. The injustice of the situation was obvious to everyone present, but military protocol made it difficult for them to speak up in the moment. Standing next to Marcus in the formation was Sergeant David Chin, 28-year-old career soldier, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had been Marcus's closest friend and mentor since his arrival at Windsor. Chen was known for his calm demeanor and diplomatic approach to difficult situations, but the blatant discrimination he was witnessing made his blood boil. To Marcus's left stood Private James MacLeod, a 19-year-old from Scotland who looked up to Marcus as an older brother figure. James had struggled with homesickness and self-doubt during his early months of service. Marcus had been the one to help him find his confidence and place in the unit. Behind them stood Corporals William Anderson and Thomas Davies, both experienced soldiers who had served with Marcus during challenging security assignments and knew firsthand his dedication and competence. They exchanged glances that communicated their shared disgust at what was happening to their colleague. At the end of the line stood Private Robert Hassan, whose own Pakistani heritage had sometimes made him a target of subtle discrimination. He understood better than most what Marcus was experiencing and felt a deep anger at seeing his fellow soldier treated so unfairly. As Pemberton prepared to continue his inspection and leave Marcus to deal with his humiliation alone, something extraordinary began to happen. The bonds of brotherhood that had been forged through shared service, mutual respect, and countless hours of training together were about to be tested in a way none of them had. Expected Marcus began to step out of formation to report to Captain Morrison as ordered, his shoulders straight despite the crushing disappointment he felt. This was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of his military career. Instead, he was being publicly humiliated by a superior officer who saw his skin color as incompatible with the traditional presentation of the Royal Guard. The other guards watched their friend and colleague prepare to walk away from the ceremony he had earned the right to participate in through his dedication and service. In that moment, each of them faced a choice that would define not only their own character, but the true meaning of the brotherhood they claimed to share. The autumn wind rustled through the trees surrounding Windsor Castle as the most important test of loyalty and courage these guards had ever faced was about to begin. The moment that would define the character of these soldiers began when Sergeant David Chen made a decision that would change everything. As Marcus started to step out of formation, Chen's voice rang out across the courtyard with military precision, an unwavering conviction. "Sir, with respect, I request to be reassigned to the same security duty as Private Williams," Chen announced, his voice carrying the authority of his rank and years of distinguished service. "If there are specific security concerns that require his expertise, then those same concerns would benefit from my experience as well." Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton turned sharply toward Chen, his face flushing red with anger at being challenged. In front of the entire formation, "Sergeant Chen, you will maintain your assigned position for the ceremony. Private Williams's reassignment is based on operational requirements that don't concern you." Chen stood perfectly at attention, but his voice remained steady and determined. "Sir, Private Williams has served with distinction in every assignment we've shared. If he's being reassigned for security reasons, then I volunteer to join him. A proper security detail should have experienced leadership." The other guards watched this confrontation with growing tension. They knew that Chen was risking his career by openly questioning a superior officer's decision. But they also recognized the courage it took to stand up for what was right in the face of obvious injustice. Before Pemberton could respond to Chen's challenge, Private James McLeod stepped forward with the nervous energy of youth, but the clear conviction of someone who understood right from wrong. "Sir, I also volunteer for security assignment. Private Williams trained me when I first arrived, and I'd be honored to serve alongside him in any capacity." Pemberton's face grew even redder as he realized that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. What should have been a simple and quiet removal of an unwanted guard was becoming a public confrontation that challenged his authority and exposed his motivations. "This is preposterous," Pemberton sputtered, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "The ceremony assignments have been planned for weeks. I will not have my authority questioned by subordinates who don't understand the complexities of protocol and tradition." But the tide of solidarity was just beginning. Corporal William Anderson, whose own family had served the crown for 3 generations, stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Sir, my family has served in the Royal Guards since my great-grandfather's time. He taught me that the greatest tradition we uphold is standing with our brothers in arms regardless of any other considerations." Anderson's words carried special weight because his family history was well known throughout the unit. His great-grandfather had served during World War I, his grandfather during World War II, and his father during the Falklands conflict. For someone with such deep roots in military tradition to challenge Pemberton's decision sent a powerful message about what true military values meant. Corporal Thomas Davies joined his colleague, his Welsh accent thick with emotion. "Sir, I've served in combat zones with Marcus Williams. He saved lives and shown courage under fire. If he's not suitable for this ceremony, then neither am I." The formation was beginning to take on a different character as more guards found the courage to speak up. Private Robert Hassan, who had remained silent through so many subtle incidents of discrimination in his own service, finally found his voice. "Sir, I request reassignment to security duty as well," Hassan declared. "If Private Williams's background makes him unsuitable for the ceremony, then mine does too. We should serve together." Pemberton was now facing a full revolt against his discriminatory decision. The guards weren't just questioning his authority, they were forcing him to confront the ugly reality of his prejudices in front of everyone present. His carefully worded justifications about operational requirements and traditional presentation were being exposed as the discrimination they really were. Marcus stood frozen in amazement as he watched his fellow guards risk their own careers to support him. The humiliation and anger he had felt moments before were being replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and brotherhood that went beyond anything he had experienced in his military service. "This is insubordination," Pemberton declared, his voice rising with frustration. "All of you will face disciplinary action for questioning lawful orders. The ceremony will proceed as I have directed, and any guard who continues this behavior will be removed from service." But his threats only strengthened the resolve of the guards who had already committed themselves to this act of solidarity. Sergeant Chen stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, with respect, we're not questioning lawful orders. We're volunteering for security duty alongside a fellow guard who has served with distinction. If you believe security concerns justify removing one of us, then logic suggests those same concerns would justify a larger security detail." The brilliance of Chen's approach was becoming clear. Instead of directly accusing Pemberton of discrimination, he was using the lieutenant colonel's own stated justifications against him. If Marcus was really being reassigned for security reasons, then having more experienced guards on security duty would be beneficial. If he wasn't, then Pemberton would have to admit that his real motivations were something else entirely. Captain Sarah Morrison, who had been watching the confrontation from a distance, began approaching the formation. As the officer who would supposedly receive Marcus for his security assignment, she had a responsibility to understand what was happening and why her security detail was suddenly expanding from one guard to 6. Morrison was a 32-year-old officer who had earned her position through merit and had always prided herself on treating all soldiers fairly, regardless of their background. She had worked with Marcus on previous assignments and knew him to be a competent and reliable soldier. "Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton," Morrison said as she approached. "I'm hearing reports of changes to the security assignments. Can you brief me on the new operational requirements that necessitate these reassignments?" Pemberton found himself trapped. By his own deception, he had claimed that Marcus's reassignment was based on security concerns. But now he had to explain those concerns to the officer who would be responsible for implementing them. Any explanation he gave would either expose his discrimination or force him to admit that there were no genuine security issues. The other guards continued to stand at attention, but their eyes were fixed on their colleague Marcus, who remained stunned by the unexpected show of support from his brothers in arms. What had started as one man's humiliation was becoming a powerful statement about the true meaning of military brotherhood and the bonds that unite soldiers who serve together. The autumn wind continued to blow across the Windsor Castle grounds, but the chill in the air was nothing compared to the tension that had settled over the formation as everyone waited to see how this confrontation would resolve. Captain Morrison's arrival had changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. As she stood waiting for Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton to explain the sudden changes to her security detail, the weight of military hierarchy and proper protocol began to work against his discriminatory scheme. Morrison was not just any officer. She was known throughout the regiment for her sharp intelligence and unwillingness to accept sloppy explanations from anyone, regardless of rank. Her reputation for asking pointed questions and demanding clear answers had earned her respect from both her superiors and subordinates. Lieutenant Colonel, I need to understand the specific threat assessment that requires removing Private Williams from ceremony duty and assigning him to my security detail, Morrison continued, her voice carrying the professional tone of an officer seeking clarification on operational matters. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his vague references to security concerns and operational requirements would not satisfy someone of Morrison's caliber. He also became aware that other officers and senior enlisted personnel had begun gathering around the area, drawn by the unusual commotion. Among those approaching was Regimental Sergeant Major Patrick O'Brien, a 30-year veteran whose opinion carried enormous weight throughout the household division. O'Brien had served in every major conflict of the past 3 decades, and was known as a soldier's soldier who had no patience for officers who put personal prejudices above military effectiveness. "What seems to be the situation here?" O'Brien asked in his distinctive Irish accent, his keen eyes taking in the tense formation and the obvious discomfort of Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton, Sergeant Chen, as the senior non-commissioned officer among the guards felt authorized to brief the sergeant major. "Sir, Private Williams was reassigned from ceremony duty to security duty for reasons that weren't entirely clear to us. We volunteered to join him in that assignment." O'Brien's experienced eyes immediately recognized what was happening. He had seen similar situations throughout his career and had developed a particular dislike for officers who used their authority to advance personal prejudices rather than military objectives. Private Williams, O'Brien addressed Marcus directly. "What's your assessment of your performance and readiness for today's ceremony?" Marcus remained at attention as he responded. "Sir, I have maintained perfect discipline records, scored highest in physical fitness in my unit, and have completed all required ceremonial training. I am ready to perform my duties to the highest standard." O'Brien nodded and turned to the other guards. "And you men feel that Private Williams deserves his place in the ceremony formation?" "Yes, sir," came the unanimous response from all 5 guards who had volunteered to join Marcus in reassignment. The sergeant major and fixed his steel-gray eyes on Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton. "Sir, I'm curious about the specific security intelligence that has prompted these last-minute changes to assignments that were finalized weeks ago." Pemberton was now facing questions from multiple directions, senior personnel who would not be satisfied with vague explanations. The situation he had thought he could handle quietly was becoming a very public examination of his decision-making and motivations. "Sergeant Major, these are routine operational adjustments based on my assessment of ceremony requirements," Pemberton replied, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. Captain Morrison stepped forward with a tablet containing the official ceremony, assignments, and security protocols. "Sir, I've reviewed the security requirements for today's ceremony. I don't see any intelligence briefings or threat assessments that would justify removing any guards from their assigned positions." O'Brien examined the tablet and nodded. Captain Morrison is correct. The security arrangements were approved at the highest levels, and Private Williams was specifically assigned to ceremony duty based on his exemplary record and ceremonial training scores. The weight of official documentation was now working against Pemberton's claims. His operational requirements were being exposed as personal preferences that had no basis in actual military necessity or security concerns. Word of the confrontation was beginning to spread beyond the immediate area. Other guards preparing for the ceremony were learning about what was happening. Many were expressing support for their colleagues who had stood up for Marcus Williams. Private Emily Richardson, one of the few female guards in the unit, approached Sergeant Major O'Brien. "Sir, if there are additional security requirements, I volunteered to join the security detail as well." Her offer was followed by similar volunteers from other guards who had not been part of the original formation but had learned about the situation. What had started as 6 guards standing up for one was becoming a much larger demonstration of solidarity. "Lieutenant," Colonel Pemberton realized that his position was becoming untenable. The documentation was against him. Senior personnel were questioning his explanations, and the growing number of volunteers for security duty was making his discrimination obvious to everyone present. Colonel Victoria Hamilton, officer of the entire regiment, appeared at the edge of the gathering. Hamilton was a respected career officer who had broken several barriers during her own rise through the ranks and had zero tolerance for discrimination in any form. "What's the situation here?" Colonel Hamilton asked, with the quiet authority that came from 25 years of distinguished service. Regimental Sergeant. Major O'Brien briefed her quickly and efficiently on the events that had unfolded, including the unexplained reassignment of Private Williams and the subsequent volunteers for security duty from his fellow guards. Colonel Hamilton examined the official ceremony assignments and security protocols before turning to Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton. "Jeffrey, I need you to explain the intelligence or operational factors that necessitated these changes to assignments that my office approved personally." The use of Pemberton's first name carried an ominous tone that everyone present recognized. Colonel Hamilton was giving him one final opportunity to provide a legitimate military justification for his actions. But her tone suggested that she already understood what was really happening. "Colonel, I felt that the ceremony would benefit from a more traditional presentation," Pemberton said, finally abandoning his pretense about security concerns, the honesty of his statement, and the air like an admission of guilt. He had essentially confirmed that his decision was based on his personal preferences about what the Royal Guard should look like, rather than any legitimate military considerations. Colonel Hamilton's expression remained carefully neutral, but everyone present could sense the controlled anger beneath her professional demeanor. "Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton, are you suggesting that Private Williams, who has served with distinction and completed all required training, is somehow unsuitable for ceremony duty based on factors other than his military performance?" The question was phrased in a way that gave Pemberton no escape. Any answer he gave would either admit to discrimination or force him to reverse his decision about Marcus's reassignment. Marcus continued to stand at attention, but inside he felt a mixture of gratitude toward his fellow guards and anticipation about how this confrontation would ultimately resolve. The support he had received from his colleagues had transformed what could have been a moment of isolated humiliation into a powerful demonstration of military brotherhood. The silence that followed Colonel Hamilton's question seemed to stretch on forever as Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton realized that there was no acceptable answer he could give. The gathering of officers and guards around them created an audience that would remember whatever happened next, and his reputation and career hung in the balance. Colonel Hamilton Pemberton began slowly. "I believe I may have made an error in judgment regarding the ceremony assignments." It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as anyone expected to get from someone in his position. But Colonel Hamilton was not prepared to let him off easily. The discrimination that Marcus had faced was part of a larger pattern of behavior that needed to be addressed directly. "Lieutenant Colonel, I want to be absolutely clear about what happened here," Hamilton said in a voice that carried across the entire formation. "Private Williams was reassigned from ceremony duty not because of any deficiency in his service, not because of any security concerns, and not because of any legitimate operational requirements. Is that correct?" Pemberton's shoulders sagged slightly as he recognized that there was no way to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. "Yes, Colonel. That is correct." The admission sent a ripple through the gathered personnel. Everyone had suspected what was really happening, but hearing it confirmed by the officer responsible made the injustice official and undeniable. Colonel Hamilton turned to address Marcus directly. "Private Williams, you will resume your assigned position in the ceremony formation. Your service record speaks for itself, and you have earned your place in today's commemoration through your dedication and professionalism." Marcus felt a surge of relief and gratitude as he stepped back into his original position in the formation. The humiliation he had felt earlier was being replaced by pride in his fellow guards and confidence in the military justice system that had ultimately protected him. Sergeant Chen, Private McLeod, Corporals Anderson, and Davies. "Private Hassan," Hamilton continued, addressing each of the guards who had volunteered to stand with Marcus. "Your loyalty to your fellow soldier reflects the highest traditions of military service. However, you will also resume your original ceremony assignments." The 6 guards who had stood up for Marcus returned to their positions, but the bonds forged through their act of solidarity would last far beyond this single day. They had proven to themselves and everyone else that true military brotherhood meant standing up for what was right. Even when it involved challenging authority, Regimental Sergeant Major O'Brien stepped forward to address the formation. Happened here today demonstrates both the worst and the best of military leadership. Private Williams experienced discrimination that has no place in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. But his fellow guards showed the courage and character that defines what it means to serve together. O'Brien's words resonated throughout the formation because they came from someone whose experience and integrity were unquestioned. His validation of their actions gave official recognition to the moral courage they had. Displayed. Colonel Hamilton was not finished with Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton. Jeffrey, you will report to my office immediately after the ceremony for a formal discussion about your conduct and your future in this regiment. Your behavior today was unacceptable and reflects poorly on the values we are sworn to uphold. The public nature of Hamilton's rebuke made it clear that Pemberton's career prospects had been severely damaged by his discriminatory actions. Officers throughout the regiment would know that he had been officially censured for his treatment of Marcus Williams. As the immediate crisis resolved, Captain Morrison approached Marcus with genuine concern. Private Williams, I want you to know that what happened here was completely unacceptable. Do you ever face similar treatment from anyone? You have my full support and that of the entire chain of command. Morrison's words carried special significance, because she would be working closely with Marcus on future assignments. Her public support sent a message that discrimination would not be tolerated at any level of the command structure. The ceremony preparations resumed with a different atmosphere than before. The guards who had witnessed the confrontation carried themselves with a new sense of purpose and pride. They had seen their leadership stand up for justice. They had participated in a moment that defined their unit's character. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the royal household and military community. By the time the ceremony began, senior officials from the Ministry of Defense and members of the royal staff had been briefed on the incident and its resolution. Prince William, who was participating in the ceremony as a representative of the royal family, was quietly informed about the situation. As a former military officer himself, he understood the significance of what had occurred and made a point of acknowledging the guards who had shown such courage. During the ceremony, Marcus performed his duties with exceptional precision and pride. Every movement, every salute, every moment of silence carried additional meaning for him, because he knew how easily he could have been excluded from this honor. The other guards in the formation felt a similar sense of purpose. They had not just participated in a ceremony honoring fallen soldiers. They had actively defended the principles those soldiers had died to protect. Sergeant Chen, standing in his position near Marcus, reflected on the choice he had made to speak up first. Military careers were often built on following orders without question. But sometimes following orders meant standing up to those who gave them when they were wrong. Private McLeod thought about the lesson he had learned about courage from watching his older colleague face discrimination, and his fellow guards risked their careers to support him. This experience would shape his understanding of military service for the rest of his career. Corporals Anderson and Davies, both career soldiers with families to support, had risked everything by challenging a superior officer. But they knew that their children would be proud to learn that their fathers had stood up for what was right when it mattered most. Private Hassan felt a sense of belonging that had sometimes been missing from his military service. Knowing that his fellow guards would stand with him just as they had stood with Marcus gave him confidence and security he had never felt before. The ceremony proceeded with perfect precision and dignity. The guards honored the fallen soldiers with the same commitment and respect that Marcus's colleagues had shown him during his moment of need. As the formal events concluded and the formation was dismissed, the guards who had participated in the morning's confrontation found themselves surrounded by colleagues who wanted to express their support and admiration for what they had done. Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton departed immediately after the ceremony, knowing that his meeting with Colonel Hamilton would likely end his career with the Royal Guard. His attempt to exclude one soldier based on prejudice had instead exposed him to the entire regiment as someone whose values were incompatible with military service. The story of what happened that morning would be told and retold throughout the military community, becoming a powerful example of how ordinary soldiers could stand up to injustice and prevail when they acted together with courage. and conviction. In the days following the ceremony, the ripple effects of the confrontation continued to spread throughout the military community and beyond. What had started as one officer's attempt to exclude a qualified soldier had become a defining moment that would influence military culture and policy for years to come. Colonel Hamilton's meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton was brief and decisive. Behind the closed doors of her office, she made it clear that his actions had violated not only military regulations about equal treatment, but also the core values that the Royal Guard was sworn to uphold. Geoffrey, your conduct was not just inappropriate, it was a betrayal of everything this regiment represents. Hamilton told him with the controlled anger of someone who had seen too many good soldiers. Damaged by prejudice and discrimination, Pemberton's attempts to minimize his actions or justify them as matters of tradition fell on deaf ears. Hamilton had served long enough to understand the difference between legitimate military traditions and personal prejudices disguised as institutional values. Your resignation will be effective immediately, Hamilton continued. I will not have officers in my command who believe that a soldier's worth is determined by anything other than their service, dedication, and character. The news of Pemberton's forced resignation spread quickly through the regiment, sending a clear message that discrimination would have serious consequences, regardless of rank or position. Junior officers throughout the military took notice that career advancement and seniority could not protect someone who violated the principles of equal treatment. Meanwhile, Gus Williams found himself dealing with unexpected attention as word of the incident reached military headquarters and government officials. The Ministry of Defense launched a formal review of diversity and inclusion practices throughout the armed forces, using his case as a starting point for broader reforms. Defense. Secretary James Morrison called Marcus personally to apologize for what he had experienced and to assure him that the government was committed to ensuring that all soldiers were treated with equal dignity and respect. Private Williams, what happened to you should never occur in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, the Defense Secretary said during their conversation. Your fellow guards showed exceptional courage in standing with you, and their actions represent the best of British military values. The 6 guards who had supported Marcus received official commendations for their demonstration of moral courage and military brotherhood. The commendations would become permanent parts of their service records and would be considered. During future promotion opportunities, Sergeant Chen was recommended for advanced leadership training. The senior officers, recognizing that his willingness to challenge injustice demonstrated the kind of character needed in military leaders. His decision to speak up first had required not just courage, but the wisdom to understand how to challenge authority effectively while remaining within military protocol. Private McLeod received mentorship opportunities that would accelerate his career development. Senior enlisted personnel recognized that his willingness to risk his career for a fellow soldier at such a young age indicated exceptional leadership potential. Corporals Anderson and Davies were fast-tracked for promotion consideration, with their actions during the incident being cited as evidence of their readiness for increased responsibility and leadership roles. Private Hassan was selected for specialized training programs that would expand his skills and career opportunities. The solidarity he had shown with Marcus demonstrated the kind of unit cohesion that military leaders valued highly. The story of their stand against discrimination was covered by military publications and mainstream media outlets around the world. Headlines praised the guards for their courage and used their example to highlight the importance of standing up for colleagues facing injustice. Royal Guards show true brotherhood in face of discrimination. Read one headline. Soldiers risk careers to defend colleague, announced another. The positive coverage reinforced the message that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, was worthy of recognition and praise. Marcus received hundreds of letters from military personnel, veterans, and civilians who had been inspired by his story and the support he had received from his fellow guards. Many of the letters came from people who had faced similar discrimination in their own careers and found hope in seeing justice prevail. One letter that particularly moved Marcus came from a retired Army general who wrote, "Your fellow guards, reminded all of us what true military leadership looks like. They didn't need rank or position to do what was right. They just needed courage and character. The incident also prompted changes in military training programs. New modules on diversity, inclusion, and moral courage were added to leadership courses throughout the armed forces. The story of Marcus Williams and the 6 guards who supported him became a case study used to teach future military leaders about the importance of treating all personnel with dignity and respect. Prince William, in his role as Colonel of the Irish Guards, publicly praised the guards for their actions. During a visit to Windsor Castle, he made a point of meeting with Marcus and his supporters to personally thank them for upholding the values of military service. "What you gentlemen did represents the finest traditions of the British Army, Prince," William told them. "You showed that true strength comes from standing together and protecting those who serve alongside you." The royal recognition of their actions elevated the story to a new level of significance. When members of the royal family publicly supported soldiers who had challenged discrimination, it sent a message throughout British society about the values that the nation expected from its military personnel. Military academies around the world began incorporating the story into their curricula as an example of ethical leadership and moral courage. Officer candidates studied the decisions made by both Marcus's supporters and his detractors to understand how personal prejudices could undermine military effectiveness. The transformation in Marcus's unit was remarkable. The bonds forged during the confrontation with Pemberton created a level of trust and mutual support that enhanced their effectiveness in all their duties. They had proven to each other that they would stand together in difficult circumstances, which made them more confident and cohesive as a team. Other units within the Royal Guard began adopting informal practices that promoted inclusion and mutual support. Regular discussions about diversity and respect became part of their routine activities, creating an environment where discrimination was less likely to occur or go unchallenged. The long-term impact of the incident extended beyond the immediate participants. Military personnel throughout the British Armed Forces understood that they had colleagues who would stand up for them if they faced similar treatment, and they were expected to show the same courage if they witnessed discrimination against others. Marcus Williams continued his service with renewed confidence and purpose. The support he had received from his fellow guards and the military establishment had transformed a potentially career-ending experience into a moment of validation and empowerment. He knew that his place in the Royal Guard was secure and that his service was valued and respected. 2 years after the confrontation that changed everything, Marcus Williams stood in the same Windsor Castle courtyard where he had once faced discrimination and humiliation. But this time, he wore the stripes of a newly promoted corporal and was preparing to lead the very ceremony from which he had nearly been excluded. His promotion had come through merit and dedication. But everyone understood that the character he had shown during his moment of crisis had marked him as someone with the strength and integrity needed for leadership. The support he had received from his fellow guards had not only saved his career that day, it had launched him toward greater responsibilities and recognition. Sergeant David Chen, who had been the first to speak up in Marcus's defense, was now preparing for his own promotion to staff sergeant. His willingness to challenge injustice had been noted by senior officers as evidence of the moral courage required for higher leadership positions in the modern military. "Do you ever think about that morning 2 years ago?" Chen asked Marcus. As they completed their pre-ceremony inspection, Marcus smiled as he adjusted his bearskin hat. "Every day. Not because of what Pemberton did, but because of what you and the others did. That morning changed my understanding of what it means to serve alongside true brothers." The other guards who had stood with Marcus that day had all advanced in their careers as well. Private McLeod was now a lance corporal serving as a team leader, his early demonstration of moral courage having marked him as someone with leadership potential. Corporals Anderson and Davies had both been promoted to sergeant and were serving as instructors at the military academy, where they taught new officer candidates about ethical leadership and moral courage. Private Hassan had been selected for the elite Special Reconnaissance Regiment. His solidarity with Marcus having demonstrated the kind of character needed for the most challenging military assignments. Before departing for his new role, He had visited Marcus to express his gratitude for the lesson in courage he had witnessed that morning. The ceremony they were preparing for today held special significance because it marked the dedication of a new memorial honoring military personnel who had shown exceptional moral courage in the face of adversity. Marcus had been selected to represent the Royal Guard at the dedication, a recognition of how his story had inspired positive changes throughout the military. Colonel Victoria Hamilton, who had handled the original crisis with such decisive leadership, was now a brigadier general and had become a leading voice for diversity and inclusion. Throughout the British Armed Forces, she credited the incident with Marcus as a turning point in her own understanding of the work still needed to create truly equal opportunities in military service. That morning at Windsor taught all of us that discrimination doesn't just harm individual soldiers. Hamilton had written in a military journal article about the incident. It weakens unit cohesion, undermines trust, and damages the effectiveness of our entire military structure. The changes that had begun with 6 guards standing up for their colleague had rippled throughout the military establishment. New policies required all officers to undergo comprehensive diversity training, and reporting systems had been established to ensure that discrimination could be addressed quickly and effectively. Military justice procedures had been reformed to provide better protection for soldiers who reported discriminatory treatment or who supported colleagues facing such treatment. The fear of retaliation that might have kept Marcus's supporters silent had been addressed through new regulations and oversight mechanisms as the ceremony began. Marcus took his position at the front of the formation with pride and confidence. The memorial being dedicated included the names of soldiers throughout British military history who had shown moral courage, including some who had faced persecution for standing up for their principles. Prince William, now in his role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Welsh Guards, delivered remarks that directly addressed the importance of the values, as demonstrated by Marcus and his supporters 2 years earlier. The soldiers we honor today remind us that courage comes in many forms, the prince said, looking directly at Marcus and the other guards from that morning. Sometimes the greatest bravery is shown not in combat, but in standing up for our fellow soldiers when they face injustice from within our own ranks. The ceremony included readings from letters that had been sent to Marcus and his supporters from military personnel around the world. One letter from a young female officer in the Canadian Army had particularly moved everyone who heard it. Your story gave me the courage to report sexual harassment I was experiencing from a superior officer, knowing that soldiers had stood together against discrimination gave me hope that doing the right thing would be supported, not punished. Another letter from a veteran of the Iraq War expressed similar gratitude. I faced discrimination because of my sexual orientation, but stayed silent, out of fear. Your story inspired me to speak up about what I experienced, and it led to changes that will help future soldiers. The global impact of their story had surprised everyone involved. Military academies in the United States, Canada, Australia, and other allied nations had incorporated their example into leadership training programs, spreading the lessons of moral courage far beyond the British Armed Forces. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by a young recruit who had just completed basic training and was preparing to join the Royal Guard. The recruit, a young woman of South Asian heritage, thanked him for the example he had set. Corporal Williams, knowing your story made me confident that I would be judged on my service and character, not my background, she said. That gave me the courage to pursue this assignment. Marcus realized that the most important legacy of that difficult morning 2 years ago was not his own career advancement or the recognition he had received, but the message it had sent to future soldiers that they would be supported and protected. If they served with honor and integrity, Regimental Sergeant Major O'Brien, now approaching retirement after more than 3 decades of service, pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. Corporal Williams, I've seen a lot of changes in the military during my career, O'Brien said, with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed the evolution of military culture firsthand. But what happened that morning, and what your mates did, for you, represents the best change I've ever seen. They didn't just stand up for you, they stood up for what this uniform is supposed to represent. As evening approached and the formal ceremonies concluded, Marcus stood again in the Windsor Castle courtyard, where everything had begun. The same ancient stones surrounded him, but the meaning of the place had been transformed by the events that had occurred there. He thought about Lieutenant Colonel Pemberton, whose discriminatory actions had inadvertently created an opportunity for 6 soldiers. To demonstrate the true meaning of military brotherhood, Pemberton's forced resignation had ended his career in disgrace. But it had also cleared the way for leadership that truly embodied the values of equal treatment and mutual respect. The bonds forged between Marcus and his supporters that morning had grown stronger over the years. They remained close friends and colleagues, united by the shared experience of choosing courage over comfort when it mattered most. Sergeant Chen joined Marcus in the courtyard as the sun began to set over the castle walls. "You know what I think about most from that day?" Chen asked. "What's that?" Marcus replied. "Easy it would have been to stay silent and let injustice happen," Chen said quietly. "We all had reasons to keep our mouths shut, our careers, our families, our futures. But something inside all of us knew that staying silent would have made us complicit in something wrong." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what his friend meant. "The military teaches us about physical courage in combat, but that morning you all taught me about moral courage in peacetime. And I learned that the second type might be even more important." As they walked back toward their quarters, both men carried themselves with the quiet confidence of soldiers who had been tested not in battle, but in the crucible of conscience. They had proven to themselves and others that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult and dangerous, was always worth the risk. The story of Marcus Williams and the 6 guards who stood up for him had become more than just a military anecdote. It had become a testament to the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they choose courage over comfort and justice over convenience. Years later, when new soldiers asked about the origins of the diversity and inclusion policies that protected them, they would learn about a morning at Windsor Castle when 6 guards decided that their brother's dignity was worth risking their careers to defend. That legacy of moral courage would continue to inspire future generations of soldiers to stand up for what was right, no matter the personal cost.